We have made it to the offseason here in year number 2 of the Kansas Dynasty here on EA College Football 25. Last time around, we went through the entirety of the college football playoff. A long one, but a fun one. And in case you missed that episode, I'll leave a card at the top right of your screen for you to go ahead and check out. Today, we're going to go through the entirety of the offseason, from players leaving to recruiting to the transfer portal to training. We're going to go through all of it today, leading up to the preseason in year number 3. So, of course, in the last episode, we watched all 11 college football playoff games, and it was a fun playoff, specifically the national championship, with Oregon defeating Texas A&M in double overtime. Dante Moore ended up winning the college football playoff MVP, cementing himself as one of the top quarterbacks in the nation, scoring a game-winning rushing touchdown in that second overtime against Texas A&M. We had some really good games in the playoff, none better, however, than the national championship. We were treated to a thriller to end the year. But first, I do want to recap our team's season before we get to the offseason, and it was certainly a weird year for us. From losing our first game of the season to Fresno State, to making the decision to start Clyde Poole and beating Missouri, to nearly beating Clemson, who was undefeated up until the semifinals where they lost to Oregon, and then winning 5 of our last 6 games, including a blowout in the Liberty Bowl against UTSA. And as we go into the offseason, we've got some questions to ask about our freshman quarterback, Clyde Poole, who had a great year. 2,600 yards through the air, over 1,100 through the ground. He was a really, really good player for us this season. Certainly better than we could have expected for a true freshman, but here's the problem. He only has normal development, and his skills are pretty capped out. There's not a whole lot of room for him to get better than he is right now. He's a very good player as is, but you got to keep in mind, we have 2 4-star quarterbacks coming in with Sean Pullard and Kerry Chosen. We still have other good young pieces like DeAndre Rainbolt and even Isaiah Marshall. So it's certainly going to be an interesting question on what Clyde Poole's future looks like. We're also going to have to figure out who shares the backfield with him and who he's going to throw the ball to. Our leading running back and top 3 receivers will be gone. Sevion Morrison, Moody Rubin, and Joseph Manjack are all projected day 3 picks in this year's NFL draft. I think all 3 of those guys really came along as this season went. And we've got to figure out the offensive line. We're going to be losing 4 starters. Logan Brown will probably be a top 100 pick. Bryce Foster is going to be our highest drafted player. He's going to go in the top 50 picks. And the one projected starter to return, James Livingston, could theoretically declare for the draft himself. Defensively, we're losing a lot here as well. Dylan Brooks was our top defensive lineman. He's gone. Linebackers, J.B. Brown and Jason Gilliam, they're gone. In the secondary, our top corner, Avante Dickerson, is gone. Our 2 safeties, Devin Dye and Javon McIntyre, 2 of the best players on the defense, they're gone. We will be returning our special teamers, Anthony Escalante and Damon Greaves, but over half of our regular starters on offense and defense will not be on the team this upcoming season, and it's going to be a real challenge to replace all those guys. Here's a look at the stats across all of college football, starting with passing. Of course, it's a really good quarterback class for this year's upcoming NFL draft, and we could have more quarterbacks ultimately declaring. Darius Taylor led the country in rushing and rushing touchdowns. It's still unclear if he will enter the draft, but regardless, he's one of the best running backs in the nation and will be a high pick this year or next year. Receiving-wise, a lot of young players here at the top of the list. Of course, this year's receiver class isn't spectacular, but I think the next couple of years there's going to be some really good ones entering the NFL. And of course, there's always hidden gems. Look at a guy like Zariah Beeson, who had 58 catches this year, nearly half, 23, went for touchdowns. He's currently projected to go in the second round, despite the fact that he's only like a 76 overall. On the offensive line, I found it interesting to see some highly rated players, including Caden Proctor, the former 5-star, amongst the leaders in sacks allowed. And then as we look defensively, we've got to do it by conference in terms of sacks and interceptions, because we can only see so many guys on the initial list. C.J. Basil Jr. of Liberty led the country in sacks with 19. Nobody's touching Jordan Birch's number this year. And then in terms of interceptions, the leader was 9. Toriano Pride Jr. of Missouri. Both Basil and Pride are currently projected to go in the second round at this point in time. So we're going to simulate and get started. That opens up with a commitment. Offensive lineman Terrence Bunch a center from Pleasant Grove High School in Utah. This is now the third player we've gotten from this school this year. Utah is becoming a nice little pipeline for us, and there is certainly some talent that comes out of this state. He's a top 200 player in the class, and we now have 3 of the top 10, I believe, centers in this year's high school class. So at least 1 or 2 of those guys are going to probably move over to guard. I don't think Bunch will. I think he's best suited to probably stick at center. So for now, that's where we're going to try to develop him. Now that we've made it to the end of the year, here's a look at the players of the week for the final 2 weeks of the season. I don't think I showed these in the last episode. Of course, Cassius Howell of Texas A&M leading the way. He had 9 sacks across the 3 playoff games. As for the bowl games across the rest of the country, we haven't taken a look at these, so I figured why not. Texas State finishes the year 13-1. I think they should have made the playoffs over Oregon State. Miami defeats Maryland. Still a great year for the Terps. Alabama over UCF. Kennesaw State ends the year ranked as they defeat Appalachian State. Of course, some of our playoff games are in here. Penn State narrowly defeats Air Force. Washington defeats Colorado. Boise State over UConn. Fresno State gets shut out. Oklahoma State wins a close one over Illinois. Georgia takes care of business in the Alamo Bowl against Iowa State. And then here in the second week, Rutgers beats Oklahoma. Tennessee over Missouri. I don't know why they're playing each other. And then we also have Auburn and South Carolina. Some SEC interconference matchups. A little bit odd, but okay. As for the final AP poll, obviously Oregon comes in number 1, Texas A&M at number 2. I would say the surprise here is Florida State over Michigan. The Wolverines made it to the semifinals. Florida State did not. I would argue the Wolverines should probably be a little bit higher. We are not in the poll, but I imagine we would be getting at least a few votes, given that we're 8-5 and have played some good football to finish out this season. Let's also take a quick look at some of the award winners. Obviously, we know that Avery Johnson won the Heisman. I do have to point out that I think some of these were altered after the playoffs. Cassius Howell, for instance, was far from the best defensive player in the regular season. He only had 5 or 6 sacks prior to the playoff, where obviously he completely exploded. We only had 1 finisher in these awards. Damani Maxon ended up finishing in the top 10 for best defensive back. I believe he came in 8th. Unfortunately, he was the only guy. I can't really think of anybody who deserved to be in the top 10 for those lists, though, so I can't really argue with it. As for the All-American teams, headlined by the Heisman winner, Avery Johnson on the first team, I do think the All-American teams are very ratings-based, especially on the offensive line and really on the defense entirely. For instance, the top 4 projected corners in this year's NFL draft all made the first and second team, I think largely because of their ratings. And yes, they're all very good players, but still. As for the freshman team, we don't end up with anyone. Not a major surprise. We didn't have that many freshman contributors. That will not be the case next year. We're going to be a very young team. Looking at all conference, Kobe Baines will make the first team on offense. He's the only player who makes it entirely. And then on the second team, we've got more offensive linemen. Logan Brown and Bryce Foster both make it. And then on the all-freshman team, Clyde Pullers at quarterback. I doubt there were many QBs to pick from, maybe between him and Isaac Wilson of Utah. Alex Ball makes it as well, even though he didn't play. And then Anthony Escalante is there as well. So now it's time to get to the nitty-gritty, and that starts with players leaving. We've got 2 guys interested in transferring, and nobody is declaring for the draft. Carson Brunn and Sheldon Brink are looking to move on. I think overall here we got pretty lucky, and I can't say the same for other teams. Avery Johnson, for instance, to no surprise, is declaring for the draft, where he'll be the first or second pick overall. Dylan Edwards, as well, is at least considering it, and I'll talk about my thought process of certain players across the country returning to school or not. But let's talk about these 2 guys, starting with Carson Brunn. I think I'm just going to let him go. We have plenty of depth at tight end. I think he would be better off elsewhere where he might have a chance to play in the future. And then Sheldon Brink is a little bit trickier because he is a guy who we recruited. He is a guy who I think is quite talented and could have the future here, especially considering the fact that we're losing 3 of our senior receivers. Now, keep in mind, we are adding a couple big-time true freshmen with Amani Law and Rajon Jones, both of whom I think are going to play roles this year. And I think both of them have pretty similar skill sets to Sheldon Brink in the sense that all those guys are big, they can all run, but Brink is definitely not the most polished receiver. I wanted to redshirt him this year, but I accidentally played him against Houston. Then I had him in against Kansas State, and that's when I realized I made the mistake. So at that point, I figured I'd play the bowl game. But regardless, we didn't redshirt him, which again was a total accident. So I think the fair way to go about this is to do a test simulation, put him in the transfer portal, and if the test simulation shows a better fit for what he's looking for, then we're going to let him go. The test has him going to Marshall. That doesn't mean he's actually going to end up going there, but he wants to play, and I think Marshall, for instance, gives him a better opportunity to do that than we will. So because of that, I'm not going to try to convince him to come back. As for some of the seniors who are gone, Bryce Foster, Logan Brown, Javon McIntyre amongst the highest rated players here, but I think we're going to have other guys drafted. Savion Morrison, Avante Dickerson, Devin Dye, even Josh Krutz, all projected as day 3 selections, and then the 2 receivers as well. A lot of guys we're going to miss here. Bryce Foster and Logan Brown on the offensive line, 2 very high recruits. Didn't work out with their initial schools. Transfers to Kansas, where they ended up as really good players. Avante Dickerson in the secondary. We only had him for 1 year. It wasn't the prettiest at times, but he gave us some good plays. Devin Dye and Javon McIntyre, the safety tandem. McIntyre really improved throughout the year, taking over the Marvin Grant role. And then Devin Dye, one of the seniors I'm going to miss the most. And of course our receivers, Joseph Manjack IV and Moody Rubin. Again, only here for 1 year, but I thought both players really improved as the year went along. And it's going to be a challenge replacing them with some of the younger guys who we're interested in through recruiting. So these are the players who the game has getting drafted, but again, this doesn't really matter to me. Obviously, what matters is who gets picked inside of the Broncos franchise, which of course the draft for that will be within the coming days. I do have to point out, though, that I noticed across the rest of the country for some of the underclassmen who declared for the draft, even though they may have been interested in coming back, the teams didn't try to actually have them return. So what I decided to do was to manually do it, if that makes sense. I looked at all the underclassmen and I figured if they have a lot to gain from coming back, I will convince them to come back. Ernest Green, Julian Humphrey, and London Humphreys at Georgia, for instance, they are underclassmen who are declaring. They don't have a lot to gain. They're already very good prospects. They're already probably all going to be top 100 picks. It makes sense for them to leave. But a guy like Daniel Harris at corner, who was their 4th corner this year and only played 50% of the snaps, he probably has a lot more to gain by staying in school. So because of that, I had him stick around this year for Georgia, if that makes sense, and I'll explain more about it in the draft preview within the Broncos franchise. Let's move on to recruiting now. This is the fun part, particularly the transfer portal, where we got a lot of guys last year. Javon McIntyre, Avante Dickerson, Josh Krutz, Joseph Manjack, Moody Rubin. A huge piece of our team from last year was formed by the transfer portal. So as I hopped into the portal, I was surprised to see that there wasn't much interest in our school. There was only one top 300 prospect who had any interest in coming here. Now the good thing is, it happens to be the 3rd ranked player in the portal, offensive tackle Spencer Fano from Utah. This would be a big get for us, and I'm excited that he wants to come here. But I don't like that nobody else is interested. As we look at our team here with the juniors, there's not many of them. These guys are going to be the seniors next year. As of now, we only have, I think, 5 or 6 seniors on the roster this year. So even though there aren't necessarily many holes on our team, I would have liked to have had some upperclassmen express interest in coming here because we don't have many on the team to begin with. Another reason is that we could really put all of our time and attention into the transfer portal because there's only one high school prospect, wide receiver Manuel Maramosa, left on the board who hasn't committed. Unfortunately, none of the guys who went to other schools have any chance of flipping. I've decided to take them off the board for good. And with the remaining spots left on the board, I'm going to look for some upperclassmen who are ranked pretty low, whose recruitments are open, who I think would be good fits for us as depth. And I was really hoping to get an upperclassman quarterback. With Ben Easter's gone, we don't really have one, but the only quarterbacks we can get are all young guys. I'm going to look at Dylan Davenport, a guard from Hawaii. He could be good offensive line depth. I think we could use more linebackers. I'm going to look at Luke Hodge from Troy. And then even though Damian Miller is only a sophomore, I do kind of want to take a look at him because I think he's got some intriguing physical traits, impressive size. Maybe he could play the Marvin Grant, Javon McIntyre role long term. So we're going to scout all these guys, offer them scholarships. Spencer Fano looks like the real deal. I think this guy can play. There's no question about it. It's a 5-team race and we're in 5th, so it would be an uphill battle, but we're going to give it our best shot. Dylan Davenport doesn't look too bad. Started some games last year at Hawaii. Actually played pretty well, so he really wouldn't be bad depth at all. Luke Hodge, an intriguing athlete. I don't know if he's really going to see the field much, but again, not a bad guy to have in the linebacking room. And then Damian Miller, 6'3", 195, impressive athletic traits. He's got a pretty good development trait. Why not take a shot on him and see if it works? So we can offer Manuel Mara-Morosa a visit. We're going to do that now. I think his recruitment is going to end after this week. And since Spencer Fano is down to 5, we're going to offer him a visit as well. We know he cares about playing style, so that's what we're going to focus on. Fano's recruitment is going to go fast, so we're going to really focus on him, and we're going to get the maximum amount of points to all 5 of these guys, and we still have like half of our hours left, but there's no other use for them. So as we simulate the week, I was hoping for some good news in terms of Manuel Mara-Morosa. It's a two-way race between us and Alabama, and we do end up landing him. I figured the visit would be enough to convince him. A talented receiver coming from Duncanville High School in Texas. Now, it's fitting that Alabama was the team competing for him because his quarterback at Duncanville is going to Alabama. His teammate at wide receiver at Duncanville, Amani Law, is coming here. So his 2 high school teammates, his receiver buddy and his quarterback, were both trying to get him to come to their schools. But luckily, Amani Law is able to talk some sense into him and have Mara-Morosa coming to Kansas. The other 3 2-star transfers we have, they are all in first place. And to my surprise, so is Spencer Fano. It seems like he had a really good visit. Oregon and Nebraska appear to be very interested in him. It's not going to be easy recruiting against the national championship winning Oregon Ducks. What an easy pitch head coach Dan Lanning can make after winning a title. We're going to offer these 3 2-stars visits now that they are down to 5 schools. There are some schools interested in Davenport, but I think the other guys, we should be fine. As for Fano, I was able to figure out the pitch combination that works, knowing that he cares about conference prestige and playing style. There's only one other one that fits. So we're going to offer him that. Otherwise, this is how we're going to use our hours. We're going to simulate the week, hope for the best. I'm not expecting any commitments this week, and I was wrong. Offensive tackle, Spencer Fano is a Kansas Jayhawk. We're able to take him away over Oregon. We went all in on him over these first 2 weeks of the transfer portal, and we get him. A 6'5", 305-pound offensive tackle who looks to be the complete package. Solid run blocker, improving as a pass protector. I will point out that he was honestly a lot better as a sophomore in terms of his pass protection ability than last year as a junior. He also had worse quarterback play, going from Cam Rising to Isaac Wilson. The freshman took more sacks. Fano could have played better, though. He had a 4-sack game against West Virginia, but he did play pretty well against us back in Week 8. He is a twin brother on Utah's team who plays on the defensive line, so the twins are going to be separated, but Spencer here clearly felt like going in the transfer portal is his best option. He'll be staying within the conference, and I hope we get to play against Utah this year. The other 3 guys in the transfer portal are all down to 3 schools. We are in first place for all of them. I think it's pretty likely we're going to get them, although there is plenty of interest for all 3 of them, but those schools are not putting points into them like we are. Not much to change. We're going to simulate the week going into week number 4. And let's see if we get these guys. We'll start with offensive guard Dylan Davenport from Honolulu, Hawaii. He has spent his time at the University of Hawaii. Now, he's only a 72 overall. And again, I didn't get him with the plan that he's going to start this year. We have multiple higher-rated guards on the roster. But this is a guy with some experience. Their starting left guard went down in week 4. He replaced him and honestly played pretty well. He only allowed 2 sacks after that the rest of the way. So I think he's going to be a really good depth piece for us. I wanted to use the transfer portal to get upperclassmen, and even though there weren't that many interested, I think Dylan Davenport might be a diamond in the rough. Linebacker Luke Hodge from Troy, 6'2", 225, solid size, impressive athletic ability. The rest of this game isn't that great, but I think he could be a good special teamer and a depth piece if we need it. We've got a good amount of depth at linebacker as is, but it doesn't hurt to add more guys to the room. And then Damian Miller, a guy who is not an upperclassman, but I saw him and saw some impressive long-term upside. He has impact development, good size at 6'3", 195. He's already a 71 overall, only being a sophomore. And as you can see, He's quite raw, but he's got the physical tools to be really good, and I think we can mold him into whatever type of player that we want. Again, as I've talked about, the Marvin Grant, Javon McIntyre role, the strong safety who can cover a little bit, but is at their best near the line of scrimmage. I think that could be Damian Miller's type of skill set, and I'm excited to potentially develop him as such. So even though there is one more week of recruiting, there's nothing else for us to do. Everybody on the board has committed. Now, unfortunately, our recruiting class has gone down from number 4 to number 6. I'm still feeling really good about the group we ended up with. Of course, we have 1 5-star with Quantavius Landers, a whole lot of 4-stars, some good 3-stars, and some good transfers in there as well. And these lower-ranked guys are going to have an opportunity to compete. Remember last year, the lowest-ranked player in the recruiting class was Clyde Poole, who ended up being our most impactful freshman. Now, it is disappointing that our recruiting class dropped from number 4 to number 6, because in order to get the elite recruiter thing, you need to sign 2 top 5 recruiting classes, and considering we're at number 6, and considering we're not going to get anybody else to commit, it looks like we're going to end up outside of the top 5, which is really unfortunate because I kind of figured that this is going to be our best chance within the next few years to get a top 5 class, being that we're coming off a national championship appearance. I don't think it's going to be as easy next year since, well, we're not a national champion. I've got more bad news if you guys want it. One of our top recruits has recently flipped his commitment, and it's not some random 3-star. Oh no. Running back Reed Sharp is going to Minnesota. He's the second-ranked player on the board. He's a top 40 player in the class and one of the best running backs in the entire country. Minnesota landed a 5-star quarterback, and they're adding a great running back to pair with him in the backfield. Now, this is interesting because if you remember, Reed Sharp's deal breaker was championship contender, and we hovered around the B- deal breaker, but we never finished below it. Oddly enough, I'm pretty sure Minnesota's is below B-, so I'm not really sure what he's thinking. But unfortunately, we're losing out on a great player. I think we'll survive, though. We have 2 other really good running backs with Ty Lord and Cordell Teamer coming in. Teamer, like Shepard, is a gem. So I'm confident that we'll be fine, but it does sting losing out on one of the top players in our recruiting class and a guy in Sharp who we really put a lot of focus and emphasis on getting throughout the season. But that's part of college football. He requested out of his national letter of intent, and he's going to be a Golden Gopher next year. Now we get to the fun part, though, which is moving some positions around and training results. But before that, here at National Signing Day, I want to point out that we actually do end up with the 4th-ranked class in the country. This does not make any sense because we didn't add anybody since we were in 6th. But I'm not going to complain either. Now we're a lot closer to the elite recruiter. Again, I don't think it's going to happen next year or anything, but hopefully it'll happen at some point within this series. Let's take a look at some other highlights across the nation in terms of the top recruiting classes. Miami, Oregon, and Notre Dame are the 3 schools who finish ahead of us. And then in the transfer portal, I put a lot of random quarterbacks on big teams across the country who were never going to have a chance to start. Lincoln Keenholz from Ohio State is going nowhere. Great job, EA. Austin Mack from Alabama is going to Oregon. He'll back up Dante Moore this year and be the starter next year. A.J. Maddox is going to UTSA. See, this one makes sense. They need a quarterback. Maddox was a former highly regarded recruit. I don't see a pathway for him to play in at Ole Miss, but now he's going to get a chance to start with the Roadrunners. Aaron Noland going to Duke. I would have liked to have seen him start this year, but he'll sit behind Malik Murphy and then probably be the starter next year. Austin Novosad from Oregon. He's going to go to TCU. He'll back up Josh Hoover and compete for the starting job the following year. Malachi Singleton to Ohio State. This one seems a little bit weird. I did have 2 Buckeye quarterbacks transfer, but if Julian Sayin were to enter the NFL draft next year, then I guess he could compete for the starting job. And then Christopher Vizina is going from Clemson to Clemson. I hope he enjoys handing Lenoris Sellers Gatorade over the next 2 years because he will not be playing. As for the guys who were actually in the portal, the top player is Zion Turner, the quarterback from Jacksonville State. He's going to Miami. Big get for the Canes. They did not have good quarterback play last year with Reese Poffenbarger. I thought they would move to the freshman, Keanu Hokulani, but I guess he's going to sit for another year. Eli Holstein is going back to Alabama, where he started his collegiate career, to back up Ty Simpson. Okay. Roman Hemby is going to Ohio State. That's a big one. He wants to win a championship, so I get it. He's going to have a smaller role, but I do think he will have a role there. Gabe Williams is a big one going to Alabama, a talented young player from Virginia Tech who's got 3 more years of eligibility. PJ Williams to Texas State. That's a big get for them. Xavier Brown from Alabama to UCLA. Kershawn McCray is going to Clemson. They're returning all their receivers. I don't really see how he's going to play, but okay. Ellis Robinson, once looked at as one of the top prospects in the country as a high school prospect, is on to his 3rd school in 3 years. He's going to Boston College. Big get for the Eagles. And then as we look at the quarterbacks, obviously there's a bunch of guys who I put in manually. We talked about Zion Turner, but there are some other interesting ones. Sam Levitt is going to Ohio State. I don't know why. He's just going to be a backup there. Zeon Christ to LSU. See, this one makes a lot more sense. He's going to replace Garrett Nussmeier. Justin Martin to Oregon. Fernando Mendoza to Ohio. That's an interesting one. Jacob Knuth was supposed to be the starting quarterback at Kansas State this year. He enters the portal and nobody wants him. Hilarious. At running back, Nate White is going to Oregon. Alton McCaskill to Alabama. Braylon McReynolds also to Alabama. I wish these older prospects all had a playing time deal breaker because there's no way Alabama is going to be able to get all of these guys on the field. It's just not possible. At wide receiver, Parker Kingston is going to Oregon. Nick Harbor is going to Maryland. The Terps had a big season last year. They're able to land him. Zachary Card to Liberty. This is a sleeper. He had a great year this season at Oregon State. And then our transfers, Carson Brunn staying within the conference. He's going to Iowa State. And Sheldon Brink will stay at a power school. He's going to Arkansas. I was a little surprised by this at first, but they kind of do need some receiver help. So I do see this as a landing spot for him. And I hope he does well. Again, a guy who we recruited here. I really liked his upside, but I think we're going to be fine at receiver. We've got the 2 freshmen coming in, and we've got some solid players already on the roster. Now time for position changes. I've got a lot of moves I want to make here. But before we do that, we can now look at the overall ratings of our transfers and our freshmen. I already showed you guys how good the transfers are, but now we finally get to see the overall ratings of all of our freshmen, and this is going to be especially interesting. I'm really curious to see, of course, the 5-star Quantavius Landers. I'm excited to see the receivers. I'm excited to see the quarterbacks. So a lot of what you would expect here. Quantavius Landers is a 79 overall. He looks like the real deal. Amani Law, 76. Rajon Jones, 75. And then the quarterbacks. Sean Pollard is a 76. Kerry Chosen is a 75. So both of them are still a little bit behind Clyde Poole, but they both look good. And for Kerry Chosen, we're going to put him at quarterback. That's where we recruited him, and I think that's where he's got the most upside. I will point out, I don't think there's going to be a quarterback battle, at least to start the year. I feel good with Clyde Poole as the starter going into the season, but again, I'm really excited about both Sean Pollard and Kerry Chosen. Both of them have significantly higher long-term ceilings as passers than Clyde Poole does. As for Teamer and Lord, I was going to put them at running back, but I accidentally put Teamer at safety. But here's the interesting thing. Originally, he was listed as a 75 at running back. Now it has him as a 77. All because I accidentally put him at safety. I don't really see how this changes anything because all of his individual ratings are the exact same. But if he's going to go up by 2 ratings, then why don't I do the same with Ty Lord? We're going to put him at safety and then move him to running back. He would have been a 72 at running back originally. Now he's a 75. Again, I don't think this changes much, but it looks better. So I'll take it. Teamer is now the 2nd highest rated running back on the roster. Lord is 4th, but again, that's before progression. I think Jazir Tolbert and Harry Stewart are going to be able to go up. James Livingston, I'm going to move to guard. I think he plays guard in real life, so it makes sense, but I just don't think he was that good at tackle for us last year. And with the addition of Spencer Fano, we can afford to move Livingston inside. Fano will move from right tackle to left tackle. Calvin Clements will probably be the starter at right tackle. And then I do want to move one of these freshmen. Reggie Chanel played left tackle in high school, so he makes the most sense to just keep on the left side permanently. As for the rest of the offensive line, I don't think we're going to make any more touches at tackle, but I do want to move one of these centers. I would rather move one of the agile archetypes, so that would be Terrell Butts or Benji Trahan. I want to move one of them to guard. I think Butts makes more sense, but I'm not going to, simply because his last name is Butts, and as a center, the ball goes right next to your butt as you snap it. So because I had the humor of a 12-year-old, we're going to keep Terrell Butts at center, and Benji Trahan, who goes up by 2, will move to tackle. Defensively, I'm going to move Mo Nwokeji from outside linebacker to middle linebacker. His rating goes down by 6, but somebody in last year's offseason said in the comments that his player archetype does not progress at outside linebacker. I did some testing, and I found this to be true. So we're going to move him to middle linebacker, even though he gets worse in terms of his rating. I'm not going to move any of the defensive linemen, even though defensive tackle is a big need, and I think Travion Ford and Seth Jennings will both primarily play defensive tackle. I'd rather keep them at edge rusher because that's where I want them to develop. Damian Miller, I'm going to slide over to strong safety, and I think that just about does it. So position changes are done, National Signing Day is wrapped up, and now we're going to simulate to training results. But before that, I want to use some of these staff points into the motivator tab where offseason training gets a boost. I've already done it for quarterback and defensive line. I want to figure out what's the next position group that I really want to focus on. Receiver, for instance, we've got a lot of young talent, and I want those guys to develop, but many of our important receivers are true freshmen, and they're not going to progress this offseason. Whereas, say, on the offensive line, where we've got a lot of key players who need some work, I think that's where I want to use these points. We're going to have 4 new starters on the offensive line this year, but many of them were already on the roster last year. So because of that, I want those guys to develop. Into training results. Overall, I think we got really lucky with the results here, and I'm excited to talk about some of the changes here with these guys taking some big leaps. Clyde Poole is an 83 overall, so he had a really productive offseason. Now the problem is that he is fully maxed out in terms of his rating. This is who he is. He's not going to get any better. And while I think he's really good as is, eventually, I would think one of the other quarterbacks on the roster is going to pass him. It's not going to be this year. It might not even be next year. But at some point, probably one of Sean Pollard or Kerry Chosen will be ahead of him. If not them, maybe Isaiah Marshall, whose future we're going to talk about later today, or even DeAndre Rainbolt, who has starred development. At running back, Jazir Tolbert takes a big jump. He is an 81. And we've got a really deep running back room here. Johnny Thompson's going to have to play well to keep his job because Tolbert looks a lot better and these true freshmen look good and they're going to have chances to play. Mario Maddox is an 80. He goes up 11 rating points. When we recruited Maddox originally last year, I was hoping he would be in the 70s. Took him a little longer to develop, but he looks good. I'm excited to see what he can do, and I'm excited to see who plays behind him. The 2 4-stars, Law and Jones, are both going to get plenty of chances this year. Isaiah Lamore with a big jump. He is an 83 overall. He went up nearly 10 rating points and looks to be one of the best players on the team. Carter Leversky takes a big jump. He'll be competing to start at right tackle. Kion Sample at guard with a big leap. That's good to see. He was one of the guys I was lower on in last year's recruiting class, but he looks to be a pretty good player. We don't get a big jump from Luis Roche at center, so I think one of the true freshmen probably will start there. Maybe it's Benji Trahan. Maybe it's one of the other actual centers. David Abijan takes a big jump at right tackle. It might be a 3-way race for that position. Seth Jennings goes up 10. He is an 86 overall, and as happy as I am to see him progressing, I'm a little worried we're only going to have Jennings for 2 more years. I think he's going to declare for the NFL draft once he's eligible. Zacchaeus Brinkley is also now in the high 80s. His development has been fun to watch since he was a low 70s freshman. Samuel Mpemba's an 87. Mo Nwokeji goes up 14. He is now an 80 overall. I was really hoping to get a good linebacker in the portal, but Mo Nwokeji going up by 14 rating points is even better. As for the secondary, we don't have many big jumps here, unfortunately. This is the one position group who I don't think did that well in off-season training. Quantavius Landers is our 5th corner here, but with his athleticism and with his mental abilities, I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the field as a freshman. The one guy in the back end who did have a great offseason was Taylor Davis. He's an 85. That one came out of left field, so I'm excited about that. I think the freshmen at safety, Marcus Ashe and Brandon Hines, are both going to get chances to play early on. And then Damani Maxon's rating remains pretty much unchanged. He's the guy who I'm most disappointed about here in player progression, but he already is one of our best players to begin with. I am considering changing his role up a little bit. He gets most of his snaps in the box. I might give him some more snaps in the back end this year. We'll see. We'll do some experimenting, but again, I'm excited about the freshman we have at safety. Brandon Hines is a guy who I think is going to play a lot this year as a true freshman. And then looking across the country, only one player higher than a 95. That's Caden Green, who plays for the enemy, Missouri. I don't love seeing Missouri having the best player in the nation after last year our other rival, Kansas State, did. At quarterback, Noah Fafita is the best player here. Jalen Rayner of Arkansas State is third. And then as we look at this quarterback class, I thought Malachi Nelson would go into the year as the top projected quarterback, but he's actually declaring for this year's draft. So I think right now it's probably Dante Moore after the great playoff run. Darius Taylor staying in school. That's a big deal. And again, we're going to go in more detail about that in the draft preview for the Broncos franchise. Jeremiah Smith is a 95. He had a big offseason, and he needed it. Ohio State didn't really use him in the playoff. He had 0 catches in those 2 games. Smith makes sure that will not be the case again. I think it's going to be a loaded receiver class of all these juniors, not just Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, but those 2 will be at the top. Who is this? Dakota Tull, a true sophomore at Army, is a 90 overall. He is a blocking tight end who had 1 catch last year, and since he plays for Army, he's probably never going to put up big numbers, but that's kind of cool. The biggest thing I noticed looking at the offensive line and a few other positions is that there's a lot of non-seniors who are ranked very highly here, and I think that's a good thing. I want more underclassmen declaring for the draft, just so there's a larger proportion and larger number of those guys entering the league, because I think that is realistic to what we see in the real NFL. And then on the defensive line, look how high Seth Jennings is. He's already one of the better defensive ends in college football, and with how well he played down the stretch last year, I think it's going to be a huge season for him. Mateo Uiagalelei tied for the highest defensive lineman in the game after the playoff run he had last year. I think he goes into this season as a projected high pick. I think it's going to be a really good linebacker class, definitely stronger than what we've had over the last couple of years. Anthony Hill Jr., a projected top 50 pick, returns to school. And then at corner, definitely not as talented as last year, but we're currently looking at 6 or 7 guys slated to go in the first round. At safety, Dylan Thieneman, clearly ahead of everybody else. And some intriguing young players at strong safety. KJ Flo, a true junior from James Madison. Interesting to see some of the players we find at the top of the list. Some guys you would expect, like Jeremiah Smith, and some other players who weren't as highly regarded recruits. So now that training results are done, we're going to look at custom conferences and encouraging transfers. With our big recruiting class, there are some players on the roster who we're going to have to let go. And this is where we're going to talk about the future of Isaiah Marshall, a talented 3-star high school recruit who I thought had a chance to become the long-term starter here. But with Clyde Poole's emergence and with the additions of Pollard and Chosen, there's just not a spot for him. And I want to give him an opportunity to compete for a starting job elsewhere. So we are going to encourage him to transfer. I think this makes the most sense for him. He's never really going to get that opportunity here. And we're going to do the same with Clint Fontana. We only have 4 quarterbacks on the roster, and all of them are super young. I wanted an older guy in the QB room, but I almost view Puma Whitlock, the head coach, as the adult in the room, given, his experience at the quarterback position. Isaiah Marshall is going to Pitt. He'll be competing with Julian Duggar to be the starter there. I think that's a much better landing spot for him, given his need of development. Both him and Duggar are redshirt sophomores, so if it doesn't work for Marshall, I hope to see him transfer again. So at the very least, he'll have a year or 2 as a starter at the collegiate level to see if he has upside of being a pro. Ahmad Dunham is a guy we recruited last year as a JUCO offensive tackle, but I just don't really see a future for him. Roland Haynes is a 77 overall sophomore. He's a pretty solid player, but he's our 6th defensive end right now. And that's going to get lower with some of these freshmen that we have, with Devin Murphy and Kerry Folk. There's just not a spot for him here, so we're going to let him go. And then in the secondary, Antonio Millerton and Dwayne Mills. We've got a lot of depth at corner, a lot of young guys I like. Quantavius Landers is going to play as a freshman, I think. So we don't really need those 2, and those are the guys we're going to cut. As for custom conferences, at the start of the series and during the last offseason, I talked about the idea of Clemson and Florida State joining the Big 12. I think it will be a lot of fun. Those are 2 big programs. They each just made the playoff this year, but the ACC has actually done quite well for themselves. Boston College was a playoff team this year. Miami was a playoff team last year. SMU made the playoffs both years. So I think that makes things a little bit more stable for Florida State and Clemson. The ACC had 4 playoff teams this year. The SEC had 2. So because of that, I think we're going to keep them both in the ACC for now. But the ACC has to continue to perform, or else those schools are going to try to jump ship. Otherwise, I don't think there's really much need for movement in our conference, but I did shift some conference rules around for some other leagues. This year, the Pac-12 will play more than 4 conference games. Everybody will play each other, and there will actually be a conference championship. There are also some other schools who I want to talk about moving to other conferences. We're going to start with Notre Dame. I think it's time. We're moving Notre Dame to the Big Ten. Geographically, it makes sense. This is where a lot of their rivalries fall. There are now 19 teams in this conference. I know it's kind of an eyesore that it's an odd number, but since there's no divisions, I think it's fine. Of course, as I mentioned, Clemson and Florida State could be on their way out, and I would look at other schools in the ACC, like Miami or UNC, to potentially dip. So if that were to be the case, I think Appalachian State, Troy, certainly Texas State, maybe Tulane, maybe UTSA, maybe even North Texas, Kennesaw State, and Liberty could all be options as teams who could move up from the Group 5 to the Power 4, as these programs have all done very well over the last few years, and those could be candidates for our conference as well if Florida State and Clemson were to commit to the ACC long term. So with that, we're going to simulate to our new season, and I want to ask you guys who you would like to see in non-conference play. One of our games this year will be against Missouri. They're going to travel here to Lawrence, and then I want one Group 5 school and one Power 5 school. The game gave us Middle Tennessee State and Michigan. We already played Middle Tennessee State this series, so it wouldn't be them. Michigan would be interesting, and I'll take a look across the country at some other options. I think Florida would be a fun one. Maryland as well, with the addition of Nick Harbor. As for our in-conference slate, I like that we have 4 straight home games late in the year. Remember last season we had all those away games at the end? We couldn't have recruits visit because we were never at home. And then one more thing. I was organizing the roster. I was setting up jersey numbers and whatnot. And look who I found in the running back room. Reed Sharp will be a Kansas Jayhawk after all. So he re-flipped his commitment from Minnesota back to us. On one hand, I'm very excited about this because Reed Sharp is a great player. He's a top 40 recruit in this year's high school class, star development. He's got a chance to be great. But he wasn't here for spring ball. He's already flipped his commitment twice, so there might be some character question marks with this young man. And because he missed valuable time in the offseason to learn the playbook, it might take him a little bit longer to find the field, especially when you factor in that Ty Lord and Cornell Teamer are rated higher than him. Reed Sharp's going to get a chance to play. He's going to get some snaps this year, but I see him more as a redshirt candidate, and I think it's more likely, even though Ty Lord and Cornell Teamer were ranked lower, that those guys would have a big role this year, but I still believe that Reed Sharp has the highest upside in the running back room. I'm going to call him Reed Shepherd way too many times. It's going to be embarrassing, so if it happens, just be prepared. That'll wrap up the episode, though. Let me know what you thought of our offseason down below in the comments, and who do you guys want to see in the non-conference slate? Next episode will be the opener, and if my plans hold up, I think that's going to be uploaded on Christmas, which is pretty fun. So, yeah, hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Peace out. Rock chalk.